It's very beautiful. Thank you. Okay. So friends, this is the conclusion of the first chapter of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And this particular section is devoted to spiritual obstacles and their antidotes. So we've covered a lot in these three talks. And so it's always good to just quickly synthesize. In Yoga Sutras 1 through 19, we really have the cream of the Yoga Sutras. It's summarized in the first 4 sutras. It's very clear. When our minds are ceaseless, our thought waves are ceaseless, our true nature is obstructed. When they're stilled, it's revealed. And in sutras 5 through 11, Patanjali reveals the point-by-point nature of the obstructions, which is the thought waves of the mind, and various types of obstacles. There we have indiscrimination, verbal delusion, sleep, memory. We also have clear cognition, which is very helpful. So we begin to understand how our mind is working, and that's very important. We need to understand that which we are trying to control. Verses 12 through 16, Patanjali tells us how to control the movements of the mind through practice and non-attachment. And then 17 through 19, these verses, Patanjali reveals the stages to deepen the concentration of the mind. And we find that there are two stages and then subsections under those stages, vitarka and vichara. In vitarka, perceptual observation of the mind is directed to the object and focused there. In savitarka, we lose a sense of time and become aware of the object and oneself. Oneself is still there, but we're more aware of the object. In nirvitarka, the sense of time, space, and I is diminished. It's not completely eradicated, but only the object is when these sense of time and space are diminished. And the object saturates the meditator. Then nirvichara, then vichara, the next category. Savichara, we're aware of time and space, and in the heart, the chosen ideal's body appears intensely present and living. And then in nirvichara, we become absorbed, we lose a sense of time and space, and we're vaguely aware of the self. It's still there, but vaguely. And we're no longer aware that I am seeing Sri Ramakrishna. We see only the form of Sri Ramakrishna, and that alone shines. Okay? And then we move on to Ananda. Swami Atmarupananda in his commentary explains the aspirant meditates on the bliss experienced from the form which was experienced in nirvichara samadhi. Okay? So we're meditating on bliss itself. Now, it's very hard to wrap our minds around this when we actually haven't had the experience. But it's very important to know that the tradition that we're studying is systematic, logical, and it has been experienced. It's time-tested. So we're meditating on bliss itself. Then as we move into asmita, the unqualified awareness of amness, Swami Sridharananda has explained its experience of the root cause of the experiencer. We're getting down to the very root of this I. And there's an ecstasy and joy that's replaced by tranquility in this experience. The whole cosmos ceases to exist, and it takes place in the Agya chakra, and the experience is twofold. In some pragyata samadhi, the Purusha is seen as though through a glass. Sri Ramakrishna talks about this stage. It's as though a glass is separating the experiencer and that which is to be experienced. And in asampragyata samadhi, the Purusha is seen unobstructed. Swami Atmarupana explains that meditation on the buddhi itself, that is the part of the mind where the experience takes place, it's the part of the mind that is in the heart. And that is across traditions we find in the Christian mystics have talked about placing the mind in the heart. That is the buddhi that is experiencing, that is the vessel of experience. So in the sampragyata samadhi, a sattva state of ego remains. The knower is bereft of body consciousness. There's a sense of having a very fine body, and that is the savikalpa samadhi, a higher category of savichara and nirvichara. And there is a strong sense of the I am, and the aspirant holds on to that. It's the highest manifestation of prakriti, that sense of I am. And the meditation practice that helps one to approach that state is I am the light of awareness that is illuminating everything, mind, body, and everything else. And remember, consciousness does not belong to the mind. Consciousness illumines the mind. Mind itself is subtle matter. Okay? And as we purify the mind, then that luminosity of mind becomes greater and the mind merges into the Atman. For the Vedanta, the state of I am ultimately disappears in the Atman. The ultimate samadhi, asampragyata, called in the yoga tradition asampragyata, is the ultimate cessation of all mental activity. This would be nirvikalpa samadhi in the tantric tradition. In this samadhi, there is no glass separating the subject from the ultimate reality. The last bond with the world, ahamasmi, is destroyed. Okay. Then we talked about the attitudes to prepare and develop the mind. How to develop faith from a working faith to conviction to a felt truth. And that's an experience you and I can all have. And we know, if we've been in this life long enough, we know that that actually happens. And then in Sutras 23 to 28, there's a value of developing devotion to the personal God, the Supreme Being. And it's done through psychic control methodology, where we take a handle on the mind itself. It's difficult to achieve, but it is possible. So human emotion can be more easily directed in yoga methodology to the personal God. It's a symbol of our true nature. And we reap the same results as if we were going through the path of jnana. So faith leads to the practice of vritti sarupyam, the thought of the form of God. And through meditation, we become involved with that vritti, which embodies that which is all-pervading, all-knowingness, and in that way we live in God. We live in the presence of our chosen ideal, pure consciousness within. We experience that within us. So the value of the mantra practice, we talked about. Vivekananda explained that the name and form of God is the highest reading of the mind. And remember that the mind is limited by time and space. So the form of the personal God, we can experience that form of the personal God. The mantra vibration embodies the divine presence. Its utterance, it's filled with power. The sound in whatever form has the inherent capacity to explode itself into energy, known as ideas or thought processes, and shabda, sound, becomes artha, the meaning. That capacity is a metaphysical principle of sound called svotavada. In the beginning was the word, yes. Same in the Christian tradition, okay? Patanjali tells us that Om is not just a symbol of Brahman, but its expression. And now we come to the obstacles in spiritual life. And I think we can all relate to this. Patanjali tells us disease, mental laziness, doubt, lack of enthusiasm, lethargy, clinging to sense enjoyments, false perception, non-attaining of concentration, and falling away from concentration when attained, these are the obstructing distractions. Okay. Physical illness calls attention to the body. There's just no doubt about it. And it's hard for the mind not to interact with the body and identify with the pain and the suffering. In other words, my back hurts. I have a headache today. Other obstacles are more emotional. Devadatta Kali in his commentary illustrates the kind of self-talk we go through. Apathy, one of the obstacles. I don't care. Doubt. What if this yoga stuff really doesn't work? Am I just wasting my time and energy? Negligence. I figure yoga is a real thing, but there are other things I'd rather be doing. Laziness. I guess I just don't take yoga seriously enough. And sometimes I just don't feel like doing anything at all. Okay? Dissipation. Maybe I just want to do the things I know I shouldn't by pursuing the wrong kinds of pleasures. Misapprehension. Maybe I'm not going about my meditation the right way. Maybe I didn't get the directions right, and that's why it's not working. Failure to reach concentration. Even if I am doing it right, I just can't seem to concentrate no matter how hard I try. Instability. On those rare occasions when the mind settles down, I can't keep it quiet for long, and then it's off and running again. How do you think that makes me feel? Okay. So these are problems that everyone has in spiritual life. Sutra 31. Grief, mental distress, tremor of the body, and irregular breathing accompany non-retention of concentration. Okay, so sometimes we go through periods like this. You know that we have calamities in our life. It can be war, it can be illness, it can be the pandemic, it can be all kinds of things that come into our life, and we go through a bad period. And previous obstacles can be linked to these symptoms as well. With ill health, we have sometimes trembling and irregular breath. That can happen with heat exhaustion. I know from firsthand experience. We can have negative thoughts, misery, anxiety, stress, and along with that comes trembling, gasping, hyperventilation. And there can be various combinations and connections of these negative factors, especially when buried deep in subconscious impressions. There are triggers from our past that can unleash these. So what are the yoga antidotes? In verse 32, Patanjali tells us, to remedy this, one should practice on one object. So the solutions are, we have to keep at it. You see, we're not gentlemen farmers or gentlewomen farmers. We're professional farmers. We don't give up if there's a drought or if there's a flood. We keep at it. Concentration brings perfect repose to the mind and body when practiced. And the repetition of the mantra and self-surrender strengthen and energize the mind. When you feel that everything is on top of you, that's the time to surrender. That's the time we completely surrender to God and ask for guidance and help. And that's the time we grow. So these calamities can give us the opportunity for growth. It comes with the death of a loved one. It comes with serious illness. It comes with the loss of a job. It comes with any calamity when we can turn and surrender wholeheartedly and depend on the Lord. We have a huge growth streak in our spiritual life. This I have seen in many wonderful devotees. They've been an inspiration. It's a great teaching, these obstacles that we face. Sutra 33. Calmness and clarity of mind result from cultivating kindness toward the fortunate, compassion for the distressed, delight in the virtuous, and equanimity towards the unvirtuous. So it's important, Patanjali tells us, to cultivate positive attitudes and allow them to expand outward to other beings. You see, when we think of others, we're thinking less of ourselves, and that brings tranquility. So kindness can be felt and shown to all. It's important to avoid jealousy and resentment. We can show compassion toward the distressed, and that applies putting aside our own feelings, not pity, but doing something to relieve another's suffering. For example, with the war in Ukraine, people are donating to the International Red Cross. But your prayer also is a form of service to others, praying for those afflicted. We're seeing the faces of so many people on the news feeds and praying for them. That is a wonderful form of service. It helps you and it helps others. Delight in the virtuous. What does that mean? You're all experiencing that today. Keeping holy company. Your satsang. I'm feeling it too. I'm feeling your holy company. That inspires us. That solidifies our faith. That's called growing a spiritual family. We have the support of our community, our spiritual community, and of the Lord. Cultivating equanimity toward the unvirtuous. Now, this one's a tough one, but self-righteous indignation generates rumination. We know, oh, that person did this or that. What's happening is that we're putting those thoughts in our mind, those qualities in our own mind, and it becomes a type of meditation on the very faults and failings we find so offensive in others, which then become the contents of our own minds. And actually, it has an adverse effect on us in that we begin to commit those very same qualities that we dislike in others. So that is something that is known, and our teachers tell us, please do not do that. Do not find fault with others, Holy Mother said. Try to find your own faults. Swami Vivekananda said, every reaction in the form of evil shows that we are not able to hold the chitta, the mind stuff, down. It comes out in waves towards the object and we lose our mental power. We lose our balance. He says, every reaction in the form of hatred or evil is so much loss to the mind, and every evil thought or deed of hatred or any thought of reaction, if it is controlled, will be laid up in our favor. Indeed, it will be laid up in our favor. Not that we lose anything by thus restraining ourselves. Rather, we gain infinitely more than we suspect. Each time we suppress hatred or a feeling of anger, it is so much good energy stored up in our favor that energy will be converted into the higher powers, says Vivekananda. Sutra 34. By expelling and restraining the breath, the chitta is pacified. So there are 3 phases of breath: exhaling, expelling, inhaling, and third, a momentary pause between inhalation and exhalation. When we're mindful to our breath with regularity, a state conducive to contemplation results. So a very simple pranayama at the beginning of meditation is good. Vivekananda advises, the system of 4, in-breath of 4, holding a count of 16, and exhalation on the count of 8. And we do these 3 rounds. He said you can double that, but no more than that. Otherwise, there are problems. And in fact, one of our devotees newcomers in Dallas was beginning to experience serious physical symptoms from overdoing pranayama. And his doctor told him to stop. So pranayama originated perhaps somewhere between 6,000 to 8,000 BCE before Patanjali. We don't even know when exactly Patanjali lived. It's somewhere between 2000 BCE and 200 CE. Prana is not breath. Prana is what causes the motion of breath. It's the vitality of breath. Vivekananda tells us, prana is that which manifests itself as force and everything else in the shape of motion. All 5 senses and the mind are pranas. Okay. Sutra 35. These forms of concentration which bring extraordinary sense perceptions cause perseverance of the mind. So mind is like breath. It has an inward and an outward flow. The mind flows outward toward an object and inward toward self-awareness. So it's flowing constantly. Swami Brahmananda explains, there is an ebb and a flow in the tide of the Ganges. Meditation also has its ebb and flow. This is only in the early stages. However, do not trouble about it. Stick to your practices. When you have practiced regularly for some time, there will be no longer any ebb and flow in the mind. There will be a smooth, unobstructed current flowing towards God. So if we focus intensely on an object, the perception of the object becomes keener. We feel a connection with the object. And what began as an outward flow becomes internalized. Knowledge becomes uniquely ours. We begin to see beyond the outer appearance. We understand the subtler levels of what we are seeing. And this is a case of concentration in any pursuit. Sutra 36. Or by concentration on the inner light, which is beyond sorrow. Swami Vivekananda gave a meditation in his Raja Yoga classes. He said, think of the lotus of the heart with petals downward and running through it the Sushumna. Take in the breath, and while expelling it, imagine that the petals are turned upward, and inside the lotus is effulgent light. Meditate on that. Very simple. Now we all by now know that the heart is situated between the abdomen and the thorax. In the Chandogya Upanishad, we read, within the city of Brahman, which is the body, there is the heart. And within the heart, there is a little dwelling. This dwelling has the shape of a lotus, and within it dwells that which is to be sought after, inquired about, and realized. Though old age comes to the body, the lotus of the heart does not grow old. At the death of the body, it does not die. The lotus of the heart where Brahman exists in all its glory, that and not the body is the true city of Brahman. Then in the Mundaka Upanishad, we also read, within the lotus of the heart, he dwells, where the nerves meet like the spokes of a wheel. Meditate upon him as Om, and you may easily cross the ocean of darkness. In the effulgent lotus of the heart dwells Brahman, passionless and indivisible. He is pure. He is the light of all lights. The knowers of Brahman attain him. So the heart center helps to localize our image of spiritual consciousness towards which we are struggling. And again, that heart center is 5 finger spans up from the navel, situated midway in our chest cavity toward the spine. And it is a place that begins with a location, but in actuality, the spiritual heart is beyond time, space, and causation. Sutra 37. Or by meditation on the heart that has given up all attachments to sense objects. Swami Prabhupada once explained, try to imagine how it must feel to be a great saint, pure and untroubled by sense objects, a knower of Brahman. Try to feel that the saint's heart has become your heart within your own body. That's a very specific teaching. is very, very helpful. Sutra 38. Or by meditation on the knowledge that comes in dream, or the happiness experienced in deep sleep. A holy dream of a divine personality or symbol brings joy and revelation. Yes, experience can come in dream. Devotees may even receive a dream mantra. This especially happens before a holy man, a guru, passes. The dream comes to individuals in a dream, and they go to the master and receive the initiation. It's later verified by the guru. When meditating upon a holy dream, try to maintain a dreamlike state of shutting out external objects. Often a holy dream is so powerful, this becomes easy to meditate upon. Why meditate on happiness with which we awake from deep sleep? Why would we do that? Because we're nearer to the Atman at that time. In the waking state, the three sheaths cover the individual. Physical, subtle, which is the prana and the mental sheath, and the causal, the ego sense of separation from the universe. But in deep sleep, only the causal sheath, the ego sense, remains. We're nearer to the Atman, but still far away, because what separates us from the Atman is a basic layer of ignorance. It can only be broken in the waking state. Still, the joy from the Atman radiates from this sheath and remains with us for a moment when we awaken. Again, Swami Prabhupada, we should try to hold it and dwell within it, that moment. It is the foretaste of the bliss of perfect knowledge. Now, how? In the waking state, we perceive a world of objects, events, ideas, and interact with them. The process of perception is the knower, the process of knowing, and the object of knowledge. In sleep, I is the knower, plus we have the process of knowledge, some mental activity, and the object is nothingness. Now, an analogy that was given by Swami Sarvapriyananda is wonderful. It's like you are in a car driving up a mountain at night, and you arrive at the top of the mountain, and the car, the headlights are still in front of you, and they're focused out on blackness. In Sutra 10, Patanjali had told us sleep is a mental activity based on the awareness of nothingness. Sutra 39. Or, Patanjali tells us, by meditating on anything that appeals to one as good. One could meditate on all kinds of symbols in nature. I think I might have shared this with you before, but after my sannyas, when I spent several weeks with Swami Seshananda, he celebrated by taking the devotees, the close devotees in Portland, to the beach. And in the car, we were going down to the beach through a forest of trees. And he pointed to the forest and he said, Brahmaprana, Vara is the first form of God. See? So they've been worshipped. The tree has been worshipped. The sky is a form of the formless. The ocean is a form of the formless aspect of God. You can meditate on a hill. You can meditate on a flame. The benefits? We attain a stability of mind and concentration, an ability to keep out other thoughts. With a deep concentration, one unlocks the mystery of the object of concentration. We enter into the subtle realm of perception. We are able to perfect concentration, and are enabled to meditate on higher, finer, subtler forms and become identified with that on which we meditate. Vivekananda explains, when he meditates, he is like a piece of crystal. In other words, we're like a piece of crystal when we've come to that evolution in our meditative life. Before flowers, the crystal becomes almost identified with the flowers. It's like a red hibiscus passes before a crystal. If the flower is red, the crystal looks red. And if the flower is blue, the crystal looks blue. In other words, we as the crystal become identified with that which we are meditating upon. We're able to be and become the object that passes before our vision. We imbibe. Sutra 40. Mastery in meditation encompasses everything from the infinitesimal to the most immense. So this, along with other proven methods, is time-tested and based on revelations of the seers. For example, in 1911, Sarada Devi was at Balaram Basu's estate in Kotar, Orissa, and she was in exalted moods. Her eyes were open, but she was completely oblivious to the surroundings. Sometimes, she said, I see the Master has become everything. I see the Master in whatever direction I look. I see him in the blind and in the lame. He has become every being. The beings are not suffering. It is he who is suffering. So whenever people cry to me, I rush to deliver them. The other day I saw that Ratu was about to kill an ant. I stopped her. I saw the Master in that ant. There's another beautiful example in Swami Vivekananda's life, where he saw the relation of the microcosm to the macrocosm. And it was discovered under a peepal tree in a deep meditation in the Himalayas. To Swami Akhandananda, he explained, I have just passed through one of the greatest moments of my life. Here under the peepal tree, one of the greatest problems of my life has been solved. I have found the oneness of the macrocosm with the microcosm. In this microcosm of the body, everything that is there in the macrocosm exists. I have seen the whole universe within an atom. He went on, there are laws very fine which are behind the physical laws, as we know. That is to say, there are no such realities as a physical world, a mental world, a spiritual world. Whatever is one. Let us say it is a sort of tapering existence. The thickest part is here. It tapers and becomes finer and finer. The finest is what we call spirit, the grossest, the body. And just as it is here in the microcosm, it is exactly the same in the macrocosm. The universe of ours is exactly like that. It is the gross external thickness, and it tapers into something finer and finer until it becomes God. And this is an experience that's very hard for us to wrap our minds around. It is something really to be meditated upon through the years. And as we progress in our spiritual life, we begin to get more of an insight into that wonderful truth that he experienced. There are various samadhis, outcomes of particular meditations. In Sutra 41, Patanjali tells us, when mental activity lessens, the mind becomes like a transparent crystal that reflects the color of any object nearby. The mind's coloring by whatever comes before it, be it the idea of the knower, the knowing, or the known. is called convergence, union, concentratedness, and sameness. So a yogi has systematically learned concentration on three objects: the object with form, the mind, as in Ananda Samadhi that we talked about, and the qualified self called asmita, the sense of I amness. So that is, you can go back and review those passages in the Yoga Sutras. But the main thing is, like the crystal, the meditator is able to be and become the object that passes before it. Samapatti, complete and sustained knowledge. Swami Prabhavananda explains, in order to understand, to know the atmosphere of a particular place, Shankara, for instance, would pass by a place and say, "A great soul must be living here." Then the Swami said, "But I must sit down and calm my mind, and through the grace of my Guru and Mother, I can raise my consciousness whenever I want to." So that is a state of yoga that comes in this particular sense. When a meditator meditates upon a divine personality, he or she takes on the nature of such a soul, and that person becomes holy. One feels that holiness emanating from that person. Swami Vishuddhananda related in March 1911, Sarada Devi arrived at the Bangalore ashrama in a horse carriage. There was a large crowd of devotees there, and they prostrated before her, and she went into an ecstatic mood. Vishuddhananda described, she remained in the carriage, making the gestures of offering boons, showing fearlessness. 5 minutes passed. I was overwhelmed, but I controlled myself and then slowly helped her get down from the carriage and to sit in front of the devotees. Another wonderful example in Sarada Devi's life was when she was absorbed in Sri Ramakrishna Loka. Yogin, Swami Yogananda described, during such periods of ecstasy, her manner of speech, her voice, her way of taking food, her way of walking, and her general behavior were exactly like those of the Master. We have heard that in deep meditation, the worshipper and the worshipped become one. In the same manner, Holy Mother too forgot her own separate existence. Sutra 42. When the mind achieves identity with a gross object of concentration, mixed with awareness of name, quality, and knowledge, this is called Savitarka Samadhi. You see, in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali goes back and refers to previous shlokas to give us a greater understanding as we progress through the sutras. The mind meditates upon an object again and again by isolating it from other objects. Now, you've all had that experience when you go to meditate in the heart. There are two sorts of objects of meditation. They can be from the 24 insentient categories of nature, Prakriti, and the one sentient Purusha. Vitarka means question. To meditate as questioning, contemplating the elements as it were, that they may give their truth and powers to the meditator. Venerable Ananda Maitreya explained that this was one of the processes in Buddhist meditation as well. For example, take a gross object of perception, a patch of skin on the back of the hand, a dot, a sound. Though the meditator becomes absorbed, a sense of time and the object remains. Okay? For example, Vivekananda became extremely annoyed by the jute mill whistle, and Sri Ramakrishna instructed him to instead meditate on the sound of the whistle, and he achieved much benefit. So let's unpack the process. What's present in the mind when meditating on a gross object? In other words, say a bird. The image of the bird present in the mind of form and color. Next comes the idea of the word bird, which suggests further the idea of what the bird is. It's sentient, it's curious, soft, warm, fragile. It's harmless, it's light, it's social, and there are accompanying factors. The mind is occupied not only with the physical object, but also the word that represents it, and information about the bird from memory of previous experiences of the same kind of bird. So the duality of subject and object, the result is a mixture of word, meaning, and knowledge that's taking place within us. Swami Vivekananda, in his Yoga Sutra commentary, explains, there is first the external vibration, the word. This, carried inward by the nerve currents, is the meaning. After that, there comes a reactionary wave in the chitta, which is knowledge. But the mixture of these three makes what we call knowledge. So all these associated factors are present when we meditate on a gross object. There's the object, the words that identify it, plus the ideas. And when one becomes absorbed through this process, it is savitarka samadhi, a convergence accompanied by thought. And in that state, time and space remain to some extent. They're lessened, but they remain to some extent, and the object remains. Now follows a higher union of the thought vritti with the object in Sutra 43. When the mind achieves identity of the gross object of concentration, Patanjali tells us, unmixed with the awareness of name, quality, and knowledge, the attributes, so that the object alone remains, this is called nirvitarka samadhi. The meditator is able to still the thought waves, which are reactions to the object. He or she knows nothing but the object itself as it truly is. As Kant would say, the thing in itself. Time and space have become diminished, along with our sense of personal identity. So as our sense of self becomes diminished, the object of our meditation becomes enlarged. Only the object remains as it is. Put simply, the object, say a dot, alone shines. No longer a sense of you and the dot. Only the object is. So in our attempt to get inside the stage of concentration and understand what is happening to the thought waves of the mind, Vivekananda uses the analogy of the mind compared to a lake. It's the lake of the mind, the chitta. When the word cow is uttered, a wave is produced within this lake of the mind. Now the chitta is not inside the mind. This chitta is a lake. We can see the chitta. When we use the mindfulness meditation Vivekananda gives us, calming the lake of the mind, we can see the thoughts in this lake of the mind. So the wave represents the idea of the cow, the form or meaning. Vivekananda tells us, the apparent cow that you know is really the wave. So what we're seeing is really the wave. And the mind stuff that comes as a reaction to the internal and external sound vibrations. When we're looking at our mind, we're just seeing the wave. With the sound, the wave dies away, can never exist without the word. You may ask what happens when we only think of the cow and do not share the sound. At such times, you make that sound yourself. You are saying cow inaudibly in your mind, and with that comes the wave. There cannot be any wave without this impulse of sound. And when it is not from outside, it is from inside. And when the sound dies, the wave dies. What remains? The result of the reaction, and that is knowledge. These three are so closely combined in our minds that we cannot separate them. So in Nirvitarka Samadhi, the mind is purified, so all three are clearly distinguished: sound, thought wave, and knowledge. We become saturated in the idea of the cow, which the word conveys. There's a convergence. The cow is. Sutra 44. When the object of concentration is a subtle object, there are two kinds of samadhi. Again, he's going back to a previous sloka, called savichara and nirvichara samadhi. They may be distinguished as with reflection and free of reflection. Now, in the first level, savitarka and nirvitarka, there's a concentration on a physical object, in other words, a form of a deity, personal God, or a symbol of God, such as the Om. In the second level, savichara and nirvichara, savichara is the initial focus accompanied by words that represent it, and thoughts and feelings that arise in connection with it. There's a convergence occurs with reflection. In Savichara Samadhi, we take one of the tanmatras as the object of meditation and think of it in time and space. We can take a sense of seeing or hearing, say a sound of our mental japa of the mantra, and we concentrate on that until we hear the humming sound of the inner ear. Or we can meditate on a visual abstraction, a mental image, say the form of Sri Ramakrishna in the heart. The experience of Sri Ramakrishna in the heart can seem intensely present and living. His whole body appears vividly in Savichara and Nirvichara. In Nirvichara Samadhi, Swami Atmarupananda explains, in the same meditation, our concentration deepens and we lose the sense of time and space and see the fine elements as they are. In other words, we no longer feel, I am seeing Sri Ramakrishna. We see only the form, and that alone shines. The I almost disappears. Devadatta Kali explains, it's a penetrating insight into the object's true nature that occurs. You see, as the I becomes diminished, time and space also become diminished. And then the object of our meditation is. It just is. For example, Meister Eckhart at one time said, is what I see in vision true or not? I don't know, because the next moment the vision is not there. An aspirant then struggles to gain more depth and prolonged concentration. Then he or she enters Savichara or Nirvichara. I am one with the divine ground, Eckhart said. God is the being of all beings. See? Sutra 45. Behind all subtle objects is Prakriti, the primal cause. Prakriti is the elemental, undifferentiated stuff of matter, but not ultimate reality. 4 samadhis are mentioned, preparations for the state of direct union with Brahman. For example, once upon a time, a disciple came to a teacher for meditation instruction, but returned unsuccessful. Why? Every time he went to meditate, he thought of his pet buffalo. The teacher then taught, "Then meditate on your pet buffalo." The disciple went to his hut and began to practice meditation. Until several days later, the teacher knocked on the door. And the student said, "Sir, I'm sorry, I can't come out to greet you. The doorway is too small. My pet buffalo's horns are in the way." The object becomes isness itself. The teacher said, "Splendid, you have become identified with the object of your concentration. Now fix that concentration upon God and you will easily succeed." So the level of concentration is not yet the highest in this case. There's still an interaction between the knower and the knowable. You see the subtle change as we progress, the subtle changes as we progress. Sutra 46. These 4 samadhis are said to be with seed. The levels of attainment begin with an initial focus to the point of one-pointedness, deepening to the point of convergence, then absorption. But desire still remains in the mind. Past karmas still are not burnt to ash, but liberation is near. Sutra 47. Patanjali tells us, in reaching nirvichara samadhi, the mind becomes pure and the serene radiance of the higher self shines forth. Devadatta Kali tells us, consciousness is aware only of its nearly content-free state. There is little else to claim attention. Even the possibility of object dissolves away. Only the intuitive clarity of consciousness itself, what Patanjali calls serene radiance of the higher self. In Sutra 48, Patanjali tells us, the knowledge attained in this samadhi is said to be filled with truth. In Sutra 49, knowledge attained from the samadhi just mentioned is of a much higher order, being able to penetrate where inference and testimony cannot go. We may read scriptures and accept their teachings, but we can't claim to know God because we've read them. Vivekananda explained, realization is real religion. All the rest is only preparation. Hearing lectures or reading books or reasoning is merely preparing the ground. It is not religion. Intellectual assent and intellectual dissent are not religion. In this connection, Swami Shraddhananda said at one time, and he was a great devotee of the Upanishads. He said, Swami Pravrajika once told me, I have reached a state where I can no longer bear to read or hear the Upanishads. Shraddhananda Swami said, I was shocked to hear this, but now I understand. I too have reached that state. Swami Pravrajika explained, Patanjali tells us that in the state of nirvichara samadhi, the mind becomes pure and filled with truth. The mind is said to be pure because in this state, all the minor thought waves have been swallowed up by one great wave of concentration upon a single object. It is true that seeds of attachment still exist within this wave, he explained, but only in a state of suspended animation. For the moment, at least, they can do no harm, and it is very improbable that they will ever become fertile again. Because having progressed thus far, it is comparatively easy to take the final step which will cause their annihilation. Nirvichara Samadhi is the direct sensory experience. Direct contact with the chosen ideal. It is no longer subjectively imagined, but objectively known. Teachers tell us the imagined picture of Krishna or Ramakrishna dissolves into the reality of their living presence. In the preliminary stages of meditation, the effort seems to come entirely from yourself. Swami Prabhavananda once said, "You keep forcing your mind to remain pointed at its object, but now you become aware of an outside force, a magnetic power of attraction which draws your mind in the desired direction so that the effort is no longer your own. This is what is known as grace." In other words, our practice, these are finite efforts. We're making karmic efforts. We cannot attain that which is beyond karma by karma. But we can strengthen the body and mind to become a fit vessel so that when grace takes place, we're able to receive and sustain that. Sutra 50. The resulting impression from this samadhi obstructs any further impressions from forming. Samskaras, past impressions, are what hinder the mind from attaining samadhi. When trying to meditate, the mind wanders and these samskaras appear. Why? Because when trying to repress them, they react with full force. Instead, we must try to arise one thought in the mind, the mantra, to the exclusion of all others. Then ultimately, Nirvichara Samadhi raises such a powerful samskara in the mind, all other samskaras are held in check. Sutra 51. Patanjali tells us, when the impression made by that samadhi is also wiped out so that there are no more thought waves at all in the mind, then one enters the samadhi which is called seedless. Samadhi is attained by raising one great wave of concentration, the mantra and its meaning, by which all other thought waves are swallowed up. Nirvikalpa Samadhi is seedless, pure, undifferentiated consciousness wherein we become one with Brahman. It's hard to follow Patanjali to such heights, for the Atman is not perceived if even one thought wave is in the lake of the mind. How does such a soul who has attained that state look to us? Swami Nirvanananda, Swami Brahmananda's faithful attendant, was granted that boon by his guru when Swami Brahmananda was on his deathbed. He said, "Suji, you have served me well. I have given you the boon of Brahmagyana." Now there were other monks present, and that became an oral tradition in our order. Swami Jitapmananda, a young monk, told me. He later asked Swami Nirvanananda, "On Swami Brahmananda's deathbed, Maharaj said to you, 'Suji, you have served me well. I give you the boon of Brahmagyana.' Maharaj gave you that boon, Maharaj being in Ishvarakoti. Have you attained this state?" Swami Nirvanananda replied, "Through Sri Ramakrishna's will and the grace of the Guru, I have surrendered everything." "But have you attained that state of Brahmagyana?" the monk persisted. Swami Nirvanananda repeated, "Through Sri Ramakrishna's will and the grace of the Guru, I have surrendered everything. There was no I. He was bereft of I. I have not attained this, I have not attained that. He had completely surrendered, and that vessel was filled with the highest experience. And I had the blessed fortune to meet him in 1979. A realized soul of the highest order. How does such a saint appear? They see God in you. They affirm that God in you. And they bless you in that way. There's no I. They see and affirm that in each and every one that comes to them. Such a soul has emptied his or her mind of any ego or ownership. So in conclusion, in this series of the first chapter of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali teaches us the meaning of thought waves, how they originate within ourselves, then how to attenuate these thought waves of the mind. How? By training the mind how to meditate, accompanied by the practice of non-attachment. And the easiest way to cultivate non-attachment is to cultivate attachment to the highest object or symbol of God. Then he teaches us how to make one sacred wave of the mind so strong it devours all other waves. As Swami Vivekananda said, like fire eating fire. We can take a great teacher like Christ, Buddha, or Sri Ramakrishna and read about their lives, try to imbibe and emulate their qualities, and serve them by practicing the 4 yogas. And then lesser loves began to lose their attraction. Swami Prabhupada said, it is not that we become indifferent to other people. Love for others is included in our love for our ideal. We become aware of our chosen ideal's spiritual presence within the avatar, his divine consort, in Lord Vishnu, Shiva, or the Mother Goddess, our eternal divine beings. And behind them is Brahman. Then finally we suppress this last wave of separation in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, knowledge of Brahman. We become united with that which was manifest in Christ, in Buddha, Sri Ramakrishna. Shankara said, even though a seer's mind is dissolved in Brahman, he is fully awake, free from ignorance of the waking life. He is fully conscious, but free from any craving. Such a seer is said to be free in this very life. Swami Brahmananda summarizes the steps toward illumination in his beautiful summary of the deepening meditation process, which is a meditation in itself. Swami Brahmananda said, as you meditate on your chosen ideal, think of him as bright and effulgent, and that everything shines because of his light. Think of him as living and conscious. As you continue thus, the form of your chosen ideal will gradually melt into the formless, into the infinite. Then will follow a vivid sense of the living presence until finally the eye of wisdom will open and the infinite will be directly perceived. Ah, that is another realm, far beyond the universe. After this experience, the universe appears as nothing. The mind is dissolved and you experience Savikalpa Samadhi. This leads gradually to the realization of the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, absolute union with God. This experience is beyond all thought and speech. There is nothing to be seen, nothing to be heard, All is infinite silence. It is beyond duality and non-duality. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all. I thank you all